Um, what if I told you that being, the smartest person in the room is actually like actively costing you $29,000 a year?
Yeah, that is a number that really wakes people up.
Right. Because we all sort of love to think that raw IQ is just this master key to success.
Hmm.
Like you get the advanced degree, you uh, optimize your workflow, you understand the technical data way better than anyone else in your department, and you just assume the world will hand you the promotion
It's the default assumption
or the
that,
funding or, that incredible relationship. But then you watch someone else, someone who maybe isn't quite as brilliant on paper, just walk right through a door that has been honestly jammed shut for you for years.
right, and you're just standing there bewildered.
Exactly. And you're left sitting there thinking, wait, I know I'm smarter than them. I know my code is cleaner or my financial models are tighter. My arguments are more logical. Like, what just happened?
It's a really painful realization for a lot of people.
It is. We have this deeply ingrained assumption that technical competence just automatically equals supreme influence. But the data we are plunging into today tells a deeply uncomfortable, yet incredibly empowering story.
It really is a profoundly uncomfortable reality for a lot of high achievers because it completely invalidates the rubric we were all graded on for the first 20-some years of our lives.
Absolutely, the school rubric.
Exactly. In school, you are optimized for the test. You're optimized for raw, solitary technical output. But the second you step into the real world, the operating system of reality is no longer just data and logic.
Right, it's people.
It is human emotion. The people who effortlessly command respect, the ones who cultivate these really robust, high-leverage networks that propel them forward, they are rarely the ones with the absolute highest IQs.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. They are the individuals who have mastered an entirely different set of invisible mechanics. Mechanics that most brilliant people are, quite honestly, completely blind to.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because we're not just talking about being nice or, having a bubbly personality.
No, not at all.
We're talking about emotional intelligence and social dynamics as a hard empirical science. The mission for you, listening to this deep dive right now, is to fundamentally restructure how you view your interactions.
That's the core mission, yes.
Because your success, whether we are talking about scaling a startup or navigating a corporate hierarchy, or even just keeping your romantic relationship from completely imploding, is not going to be determined by your cognitive horsepower.
Right.
It's determined by how well you decode and regulate the emotional undercurrents running through yourself and, everyone around you.
What's fascinating here is that the statistical correlation is just absolute. When you analyze top performers across completely disparate fields, software engineering, medical sales, high finance, you name it, 90% of the top decile of performers possess high emotional intelligence.
Wow, 90%. That's practically a prerequisite.
It is 90%. We really have to completely eradicate this archaic idea that EQ is some sort of soft skill.
Yeah, people love calling it a soft skill.
Calling emotional intelligence a soft skill is like calling gravity a soft suggestion. It's
Yeah.
just, it is the fundamental physics of human interaction. It is a highly systematic blueprint. And if you lack it, you are essentially trying to navigate a complex maze in the pitch black.
So let's shine a spotlight right on the financial cost of navigating in the dark, because that $29,000 figure is just staggering.
It's a massive penalty.
It really is. If you're listening and wondering, well, why should I dedicate my time to learning emotional regulation? Let's just look straight at your bank account.
Let's do it.
The research shows that professionals who possess average IQs but high emotional intelligence earn an average of $29,000 more per year than those with exceptionally high IQs but low emotional intelligence.
Every single year.
29 grand every
Yes.
single year. If you compound that over a 40-year career and invest the difference, you are literally leaving multi-generational wealth on the table simply because you couldn't read the room.
It is a devastating financial penalty. And when you actually break down the mechanics of why that wealth transfer happens, it makes perfect, almost ruthless sense.
Break that down for us, yeah.
Well, think about what emotional blindness actually costs you in a high-stakes environment. Every single time you misread a colleague's hesitation or you fail to notice a client's micro expression of anxiety when you mention pricing, you are missing critical data
It's
points.
like you're ignoring half the dashboard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You are trying to solve a complex puzzle while actively ignoring half the pieces.
Hmm.
Furthermore, if you lack internal regulation, the moment you are put under pressure, your prefrontal cortex, which is the logical, strategic part of your brain, it literally shuts down,
It just goes offline.
completely offline. You default to pure reactive survival behavior. You aren't making long-term strategic decisions anymore. You are just reacting to the immediate emotional threat.
I see this constantly, especially in the tech and startup worlds. You have the brilliant, 10x engineer who gets consistently passed over for the CTO role or the leadership track.
Oh, it's a classic archetype.
Right. And they're always furious about it. Let's call him the brilliant but abrasive coder. He writes the most elegant, highly optimized architecture imaginable. He understands the entire back-end ecosystem flawlessly.
A technical genius.
Total genius. But in a sprint planning meeting, when a junior developer expresses confusion, this guy rolls his eyes, he sighs loudly, and aggressively talks over them.
And he probably thinks he's just being efficient.
Exactly. He thinks he's just enforcing high standards or being efficient with time. He has absolutely no idea that he just destroyed that junior developer's psychological safety, he alienated the project manager, and he basically signaled to the executive team that he's entirely incapable of scaling a team.
Precisely. And what happens next? The executives promote the engineer who maybe writes slightly less elegant code, but who actually knows how to mentor the junior devs.
Right, the one who can build consensus among stakeholders.
Yes, and who can de-escalate tension when the servers inevitably crash. The abrasive engineer thinks it's all office politics. He thinks it's unfair.
Because he's looking at the wrong metric.
Exactly. He doesn't realize that in leadership, the product isn't the code anymore. The product is the team. And if you can't optimize the team, your technical skills are largely irrelevant.
It happens in sales too, right? You have the account executive who has memorized every single technical spec, every feature, every competitive advantage of their software.
They know the pitch deck backward and forward.
Yeah, and they get into a pitch with a massive enterprise client. The client is clearly feeling overwhelmed. Their body language is closed off. They're leaning back. Their arms are tightly crossed.
Emitting all the signals of distress.
All of them. But the salesperson just keeps bulldozing forward with their slide deck, totally oblivious, completely focused on their own agenda. And then they lose the deal, and they blame the product pricing.
Where's the pricing?
No. You lost the deal because you failed to address the underlying emotional reality of the actual human being sitting across from you.
Which highlights the core truth of human behavior. Business is fundamentally just people making decisions.
Period.
Period. And human beings do not make decisions logically. We make decisions emotionally, and then we desperately scramble to justify them logically after the fact.
Oh, that is so true. We reverse engineer the logic.
Exactly. If you cannot build authentic rapport, if you cannot make the person across from you feel heard, validated, and safe, you are quite literally severing your own access to opportunity.
Because they just won't trust you.
They won't. The individual who commands the social dynamics will capture the capital, the promotion, and the partnership every single time, even if their foundational technical work is objectively slightly inferior.
So if IQ is the hardware of a computer, like the processor, the RAM, the motherboard EQ is the operating system.
Now that's a great analogy.
Right. You could be walking around with the most powerful, top-of-the-line processor in the world, capable of incredible computational feats. But if your operating system crashes and freezes up every single time it receives a slightly challenging or unpredictable input.
The machine is useless.
Exactly. That expensive machine is completely useless. It's just an incredibly expensive paperweight.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. Your processor speed is totally neutralized if the system just can't handle the user interface of human interaction.
Yep.
And the absolute tragedy of this is that the lack of this operating system doesn't just impoverish you financially. The toll it takes on your personal life is often far more devastating.
Oh, I'm sure. It bleeds into everything.
In romantic partnerships, in family dynamics, in lifelong friendships, individuals lacking emotional intelligence struggle profoundly with intimacy. They just cannot hold space for a partner's distress without immediately trying to fix it with logic.
Which is the worst thing you can do.
The worst. It just makes the partner feel entirely invalidated and alone.
They miss all those subtle cues. When a partner is quietly withdrawing, or when their tone gets just a fraction flatter, the emotionally blind person just keeps talking about their day, completely oblivious.
And they usually aren't malicious, right?
No, not at all. They aren't trying to be negligent or cruel, But they escalate arguments exponentially because they are entirely consumed by their own immediate state of frustration or defensiveness, rather than taking a microsecond to try and map the internal world of the person they supposedly love.
Which inevitably leads to this compounding, heartbreaking isolation. They slowly acquire this reputation as someone who is, difficult or exhausting to be around or just emotionally disconnected.
And they don't even know why.
They genuinely do not understand why people keep pulling away from them. They are operating with massive, debilitating blind spots. But, and this is the crucial pivot where everything changes, the neuroscience is incredibly clear on this. Emotional intelligence is not a fixed genetic trait.
Thank goodness.
Right. It is not an innate talent. It is neuroplastic.
Which is the biggest relief imaginable, because we all have that friend or that colleague who goes to a networking event and they just glide through the room.
Like it's effortless.
Yeah. They make everyone laugh. They remember everyone's name. They leave with 3 job offers and a date. And we look at them and think, well, they won the genetic lottery. They were just born with the gift of gab.
They absolutely were not. While some people may have had early childhood environments that modeled these behaviors better, what you are actually observing in that charismatic person is the execution of a highly refined skill set.
So it's reps. They've just put in the reps.
Exactly. It is a set of mechanics that they have practiced, whether consciously or unconsciously, over tens of thousands of iterations. The individuals who seem naturally influential are just running a highly optimized blueprint.
That's fascinating.
And that means anyone, regardless of where their baseline is today, can systematically train these faculties. Self-awareness can be drilled, empathy can be engineered.
Okay, so let's get out of the theory and get into the actual mechanics of this blueprint. If we want this $29,000 OS upgrade, how do we install it?
We install it in layers.
Right, because the research breaks this down into 5 sequential foundational pillars. This isn't a menu where you pick and choose. They build on top of each other. And the very first mechanism, the bedrock of everything else, is self-awareness. But we need to be really specific here, because everyone thinks they are self-aware. What does actual high-level self-awareness look like?
High-level self-awareness is essentially your internal real-time radar. Most people live in a state of emotional unconsciousness. They experience an emotion, and they immediately fuse with it.
Like they become the anger.
They become the anger. They don't realize they are furious until they've already slammed their laptop shut and sent an acidic email they are going to regret for a year.
We've all been there.
Right. Or they mistake chronic anxiety for hustle and excitement. True self-awareness is the ability to monitor your internal physiological temperature in real time, completely objectively.
And it starts in the body, right? This is where the concept of emotional granularity comes in, which I find absolutely fascinating. It's not just feeling, bad. It's knowing the difference between feeling overwhelmed, feeling betrayed, feeling hungry, or feeling intellectually insecure.
Exactly. Emotional granularity is the precision with which you can identify your internal state. And the key is that emotions always manifest physiologically before they reach conscious cognition.
Before you even think a thought.
Before you even think about it, your body is this incredible ancient data-gathering machine. Long before your conscious brain realizes you are threatened in a meeting, your biology knows. Your jaw tightens.
And why does the jaw tighten?
Because evolutionary biology is preparing you to physically bite an adversary.
That is so wild.
It is. Your breathing gets shallow, your shoulders creep up toward your ears to protect your carotid artery.
That is just wild to think about. You're sitting in a perfectly safe, climate-controlled conference room, listening to Chad from accounting critique your quarterly projections. And your body is literally preparing for hand-to-hand combat on the savannah.
Exactly. That ancient hardware is betraying you in a modern context. Self-awareness is having the observer mind to notice, my jaw is clenched, my heart rate is elevating, I am shifting into a threat response.
You're just noticing it, not reacting yet.
Right. But it goes deeper than just naming the physiological symptom. It requires mapping your specific historical triggers.
Like knowing that you have a deep-seated trigger around your intelligence being questioned. So if someone asks you to explain a formula you used, your default pattern is to perceive it as an attack, and you immediately get defensive and start speaking faster.
Yes.
If you map that pattern, you can catch the loop playing out in real time. But awareness alone isn't enough, right? Awareness without action just makes you an angry person who is highly aware that they are angry.
It's a miserable place to be, yeah.
How do we actually stop the explosion? That brings us to the second mechanism, self-regulation.
Precisely. Once the radar detects the incoming missile, what do you do with that information? Self-regulation is the capacity to manage the emotional energy rather than letting it dictate your behavior.
Okay, manage it, not squash it.
Right. And we must be incredibly clear on this distinction. Self-regulation is not emotional suppression. It is not swallowing your feelings or turning into a stoic, unfeeling robot.
Because that just leads to a meltdown later.
Suppression destroys you physically and psychologically. Regulation means feeling the emotion at its absolute maximum intensity, but strategically choosing your behavioral response.
You can be absolutely terrified, your heart pounding out of your chest, but still walk on stage and deliver the keynote.
Yes.
You can be vibrating with rage because a client insulted you, but still maintain a perfectly calm, diplomatic tone. The research constantly brings up this idea of the pause, the tiny microscopic space between a stimulus and your response.
That space is everything.
People with terrible self-regulation have zero space. Stimulus hits, and they react instantly, like an emotional ping-pong ball bouncing off the walls.
Expanding that microscopic space is literally the entire game of emotional intelligence. It's where all your power lies. We are going to get into the exact daily neurological protocol for how to physically expand that space in just a moment.
Good, because I know people want the tactical stuff.
We'll get there. But to complete the foundation, we need to understand the remaining pillars. The third mechanism is motivation, but specifically intrinsic values-based motivation.
It's not just chasing a paycheck.
No, it's not about being driven by the external applause or the end-of-year bonus or the fancy title on LinkedIn.
Because those things are fragile. If you are entirely externally motivated, the moment you fail, or the moment the market crashes, you completely collapse. Intrinsic motivation is having a growth mindset where failure is no longer a referendum on your core worth as a human being.
It divorces your ego from the outcome.
Right. Failure is stripped of its emotional weight and viewed purely as clinical data. It's just feedback.
Which grants you this extraordinary resilience. You can absorb criticism that would completely devastate someone else, extract the useful data from it, and basically discard the rest.
That's a superpower in itself.
It is. Now, once you have these three internal pillars, awareness, regulation, and motivation, you turn your focus outward. That's the fourth mechanism, empathy. And I want to be very careful here because almost everyone believes they are highly empathetic.
Oh, everybody thinks they are.
But neurologically speaking, most people are just projecting.
Projection versus empathy. That is a huge distinction. Because projection is just me assuming that you feel the exact same way I would feel if I were in your shoes. I'm just copy-pasting my emotional blueprint onto you.
Exactly. Which isn't empathy at all.
Right. True empathy is stepping out of my shoes entirely.
Yes. True empathy is the active, deliberate suspension of your own ego and your own emotional context to map someone else's internal reality. It requires you to be an emotional detective.
An emotional detective. I like that.
You have to observe their baseline behavior and notice the deviations. You have to spot the micro-expression of disgust that flashes across their face for 1/10 of a second before they plaster on a polite smile. You have to hear the slight hesitation in their voice.
But I want to push back on empathy being this, ultimate virtue, because I've seen it go horribly wrong.
Really? How so?
Well, I've seen managers who are so empathetic that they completely lose their ability to lead. They absorb all the stress of their team. They feel everyone's pain so deeply that they can't bring themselves to give critical feedback or, fire someone who is toxic. Doesn't hyper-empathy actually destroy leadership?
That is a phenomenal point, and it perfectly illustrates the danger of missing the other pillars. What you are describing is a failure of self-regulation layered on top of high effective empathy.
Effective empathy.
Yes, there are two types of empathy, cognitive and affective. Cognitive empathy is understanding what someone is feeling. Affective empathy is actually feeling what they are feeling, absorbing their emotional state.
Oh, like catching their cold.
Exactly. If a leader has high affective empathy but low self-regulation, they become emotionally compromised. They bleed out, metaphorically speaking.
Right, they can't help because they're drowning too.
True emotional mastery means using cognitive empathy to gather the data like, I understand this employee is stressed and fearful, but using self-regulation to maintain your own centered state so you can actually lead them out of the fear rather than just drowning in it with them. We are aiming for compassionate action, not emotional enmeshment.
That is such a crucial, counterintuitive insight. Empathy without boundaries is just self-sabotage, which leads us to the fifth and final pillar, where everything we've discussed is weaponized in the real world, social skills.
Yes, the capstone.
And this isn't just knowing which fork to use at a dinner party. This is the sophisticated external application of the first four pillars.
Exactly. It's the ability to dynamically adapt your communication style based on the empathy data you just gathered. If your empathy radar tells you that the executive you are pitching to is highly analytical, impatient, and direct, your social skills allow you to instantly drop the flowery narrative and hit them with bullet points and ROI.
You match their frequency.
But if you are speaking to a highly collaborative diplomatic team member, your social skills tell you to slow down, ask about their weekend, and build consensus before making a demand.
So we have the theory. We have the architecture of the operating system. But a blueprint doesn't build a house. How do we actually train this? How do we build these neural pathways?
This is where the work happens.
The research provides a remarkably specific, actionable protocol. Let's walk through this daily schedule, because if you don't physically practice this, nothing changes. You just listen to an interesting deep dive and stay exactly the same.
And that's not what we want.
Exactly. The very first step in this training regimen is setting an alarm on your phone for every 1 to 2 hours. When it goes off, you ask yourself 2 simple questions. What am I feeling right now? And what is my energy level?
And the critical instruction here is absolute non-judgment. When the alarm goes off, if you realize you are feeling petty, jealous, and exhausted, you do not judge yourself for feeling that way.
You don't try to fix it right then.
No, you don't try to change it. You just observe it. I'm experiencing jealousy. By doing this, you are neurologically strengthening what psychologists call the observer self. You are creating a separation between the consciousness that is observing and the emotion that is being experienced.
I have to admit, setting an alarm every 60 minutes to check my feelings sounds exhausting.
It sounds a bit much, yeah.
And maybe a little self-absorbed. Like, I have a job, I have deadlines. I can't be sitting at my desk psychoanalyzing my inner child every time the clock strikes 2. Won't this just make me hyper-neurotic?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it absolutely feels clunky and incredibly intrusive at first. But let's look at the mechanics of skill acquisition. Think about learning to drive a manual transmission car.
Oh man, terrible memory, but yes.
The first time you get behind the wheel, you are acutely, painfully aware of every single physical movement. You are analyzing the clutch pressure, the stick shift, the RPMs on the dashboard. It takes 100% of your cognitive bandwidth, and you are exhausted after 5 minutes.
Right, stalling out at every red light.
But what happens after 6 months? You are changing gears while drinking coffee and listening to the radio, entirely unconsciously. Your brain has relegated that complex action to muscle memory in the basal ganglia.
Okay, I see where you're going. You are building emotional muscle memory.
Precisely. We call it stress inoculation. By forcing your brain to step back and observe your emotional state when the stakes are incredibly low, like when you are just sitting at your desk answering boring emails, you are physically building the neural pathways of the observer self.
You are building the track before the train comes.
You are thickening the myelin sheath around those neurons. So 3 months from now, when you are in a massive crisis and the stakes are life or death, you don't have to consciously remember to step back and observe. Your brain does it automatically. You create that life-saving space between trigger and reaction effortlessly, which actually saves you an unfathomable amount of emotional energy in the long run.
You sweat in training so you don't bleed in battle.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've built the observer self. Now, what happens inside that space when the actual trigger hits? You get the email from your boss that totally throws you under the bus. The adrenaline spikes. The protocol outlines a specific 10-second sequence called the S.2P protocol, STOP.
It is elegant in its simplicity. S stands for stop. You physically halt whatever you're doing. You do not hit reply. You do not speak. You freeze the action.
Yeah, total freeze.
Braze is take a breath. O is observe what is happening in your body and mind, bringing in that observer self you've been training. And P is proceed with intention.
Now wait, imagine you are in a heated boardroom debate. The CEO asks you a pointed, aggressive question.
Yeah.
If I physically stop, freeze, and take a long, deep breath before I answer, aren't I going to look completely deer in the headlights? Won't I look weak or out of my depth?
It's a valid fear, but it's based on a misunderstanding of how this looks externally. We aren't talking about closing your eyes and doing a yoga chant in the boardroom.
Okay, good, because that would be weird.
This happens in microseconds. A well-executed pause, accompanied by a steady gaze and a controlled inhalation, actually projects massive authority.
Really?
Absolutely. It signals to the room that you are entirely unbothered by the aggression, that you are considering your words carefully, and that you dictate the pace of the conversation, not them. A reactive, rapid-fire response is what actually signals fear and submissiveness.
That is a brilliant reframe. The pause is a power move. But let's say the trigger is so severe, maybe you just got fired, or a client just absolutely screamed at you that the S.P protocol isn't enough. Your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, has completely hijacked your system.
You're flooded.
You have cortisol and adrenaline flooding your bloodstream. You literally cannot think logically. The protocol demands a physiological intervention here, specifically the 4-4-6 breathing technique.
When you are in a full amygdala hijack, your prefrontal cortex is offline. You cannot think your way out of it because the thinking part of your brain has been shut down by your biology.
So you have to fight fire with fire.
You have to use biology to fight biology. The 4-4-6 breath is the fastest way to do that. You inhale silently through the nose for a count of 4. You hold the breath for a count of 4. And you exhale slowly with pursed lips for a count of 6.
And the magic is in that extended exhale, right? Explain the neuroscience of why that 6-second exhale is the literal brake pedal for the human nervous system.
It all comes down to the vagus nerve, which wanders from your brainstem down through your heart, lungs, and digestive tract. When you inhale, your heart rate naturally speeds up slightly. When you exhale, it slows down.
Okay.
By intentionally making your exhale longer than your inhale, you are mechanically stimulating the vagus nerve. This sends a biological signal to your brain to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest state.
So you are basically tricking your brain into calming down.
It physically forces your heart rate to drop and your blood pressure to lower. You are literally biohacking your way out of a panic attack.
And you pair that breath with grounding.
Right.
You release the tension in your jaw, you drop your shoulders away from your ears, and you do a quick sensory countdown. 5 things you can see around the room, 4 things you can physically feel, 3 things you can hear.
Yes, the 5-4-3 technique.
It yanks your brain out of the catastrophic, spiraling thoughts of the future and forces it to process the literal, physical, present reality. It's a hard reboot for your nervous system.
Exactly. And to bookend this entire daily system, the protocol mandates a morning and evening routine. This is non-negotiable for real mastery.
Bookends are so important.
It takes 10 minutes in the morning to set an emotional intention. You look at your calendar and say, I have a hostile negotiation at 2 p.m.
Yeah.
How do I want to show up? What is my emotional strategy?
You just wing it.
Never.
Mm-hmm.
And then, crucially, 10 minutes at night for an emotional review. You audit your day. Where did I lose my temper? What was the physiological trigger? How could I have deployed the S.P protocol earlier?
It's treating your emotional health with the exact same ruthless, data-driven tracking that a professional athlete uses for their macros and their workout volume.
That's the perfect way to put it.
If you don't track it, you can't optimize it. Okay, so we've spent a lot of time on the internal operating system. We've upgraded the hardware. We are regulating our state. Now we move to the external application.
The fun part.
How do we deploy this immense emotional control to actually build the $29,000 advantage? How do we build unbreakable rapport and expand our professional networks? Let's start with conversational competence, because the research completely destroys the way most of us communicate.
Most people are fundamentally terrified of networking, so they hide behind socially acceptable scripts. And the most insidious, useless script in the English language is, how are you?
Oh, I have a visceral reaction to that question. I was at this high-end industry mixer a few months ago. Everyone was in suits, sipping overpriced sparkling water, looking miserable.
I can picture it perfectly.
Right. I walked up to a group, introduced myself, and asked, how's everyone doing tonight? And it was like I had deployed a conversational EMP. They all just stared at me, gave a synchronized monotone, good, how are you? And then the silence stretched out until it was physically painful.
The absolute worst feeling.
The conversation died before it even had a pulse.
Because how are you is functionally invisible. It requires zero cognitive engagement, so it elicits an automated, thoughtless response. To build real rapport, you have to bypass the social autopilot.
Have to wake them up.
The protocol suggests replacing it entirely with open-ended, high-leverage questions. Instead of, how are you, you ask, what has been the absolute highlight of your week? Or, what is a project you are working on right now that you are genuinely excited about?
It forces a pattern interrupt. When you ask someone about the highlight of their week, You can literally watch their eyes dart upward as they search their memory banks for a positive, engaging experience.
Yes, their entire physiology
And
changes.
when they find it, they smile, their posture opens up, they get animated, and suddenly they associate that positive physiological state with you.
Exactly. You are anchoring positive emotions to your presence, but you can't just be an interrogator. If they share a win or a struggle, you have to participate. This brings us to a fascinating mechanic called disclosure reciprocity.
Disclosure, reciprocity, the mechanics of vulnerability. This is where you match the depth of what they just shared to create psychological symmetry.
Exactly.
If someone takes a risk and tells you they are really struggling with burnout from a recent project launch, you don't just stand there and say, wow, that sucks, hope it gets better. That leaves them feeling exposed and foolish for sharing.
Right, they feel like they just overstepped. You have to balance the ledger. You share a small, relevant, authentic struggle of your own. You say, I completely understand. After our Q3 push last year, I was so depleted I almost quit. How are you managing the stress?
You match their bet.
By matching their level of vulnerability, you remove the status hierarchy. You create a safe, level playing field. This is how you take a surface-level acquaintance and fast-track them into a trusted ally.
And this micro skill of rapport building scales up into how you architect your entire professional network. The research draws a brutal contrast between traditional networking and what they call the value-first approach.
Night and day difference.
Traditional networking feels disgusting to most people because it is purely extractive. You go to a conference, you hand out 50 business cards, and your internal monologue is entirely focused on who here can give me a job, who here can give me funding.
And people can sense it.
People can smell that desperation and self-interest on you from across the room.
They absolutely can. It triggers their threat response immediately. The value-first approach completely inverts the paradigm. Your only objective when entering a room is, how can I aggressively add value to the lives of these people before I ever ask for a single favor?
And this isn't vague altruism. The protocol breaks this down into 5 distinct, actionable categories of value you can offer to anyone, regardless of your current status.
Let's walk through them, because this is really the core engine of networking.
Let's break those 5 down, because this is the actual roadmap to becoming indispensable. The first is information value. This is curating data. If you know a colleague is trying to expand into the Asian market, and you read a brilliant white paper on supply chain logistics in Singapore, you send it to them.
It shows you are listening to their specific needs.
Right. You are acting as a highly specific filter for their exact problems.
The second is connection value. This requires almost zero effort, but yields massive returns. It is simply introducing 2 people in your network who could mutually benefit from knowing each other. You become the node that connects the network.
The ultimate superconnector move.
The third is resource value. This is giving them a tangible asset.
Give me a specific example of resource value, because I think people get stuck here. They think they need to give away money or like expensive software.
No, it can be incredibly simple. Let's say you are chatting with a founder who mentions they are drowning in the chaos of onboarding new employees. You happen to have built a really elegant, automated Excel template for tracking onboarding workflows at your own job.
Oh, I see.
You clean it up, remove your company's proprietary data, and you send it to them the next morning with a note saying, heard you mention the onboarding chaos. This template saved my life last year. Hope it helps. You just solved a massive migraine for them for free. They will never forget it.
That is brilliant. The fourth is support value, which is profoundly underrated. Sometimes value is just being the person who shuts up and actively listens while someone vents about a toxic board member.
People just want to be heard.
Or being the first person to publicly congratulate them on LinkedIn when they get promoted. And the fifth, which the data says is the absolute highest leverage, is opportunity value.
Opportunity value is life-changing. It's alerting someone to an unlisted job opening, inviting them to an exclusive mastermind dinner, or bringing them in on an early-stage investment. When you provide opportunity value, you fundamentally alter the trajectory of their career.
And they will remember who gave them that shot.
Forever. And to execute this 5-pillar strategy consistently across hundreds of contexts, you cannot rely on your organic memory. High EQ individuals use infrastructure.
Right, they use metadata. And I know people listening who use CRMs or spreadsheets for networking might think, isn't that sociopathic, tracking human beings in a spreadsheet?
It sounds a little clinical, sure.
But it's actually the opposite. A sociopath doesn't care enough to remember the details. High EQ people use metadata to remember the things that actually matter. They aren't just logging birthdays.
No, it's about the nuances.
If a client mentions in passing that their daughter is terrified of her upcoming college entrance exams, the high EQ person tags that in their system. 3 months later, they don't send a generic checking in on our Q4 pipeline email. They send an email that says, thinking of your daughter this week, hope the exams went well. By the way, whenever you're ready to look at Q4, let me know.
It proves that you are fully present and listening to them as a human being, not just as a revenue source. Now, executing all of this requires a certain level of social confidence, and one of the most transformative concepts in this research is how to completely neutralize social anxiety, using what is called social contribution framing.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because if you suffer from social anxiety, your palms sweat, your heart races when you walk into a crowded room, it is almost always because you are fundamentally self-obsessed in that moment.
It's all inward focus.
Your internal monologue is, do I look okay? Do they think I'm smart? Are they judging me? Will they like me? You are casting yourself as a performer and everyone else as a hostile judge.
Exactly. Social anxiety is rooted in egocentric fear. But the moment you flip the frame to contribution when you walk through the door and ask, who in this room looks uncomfortable and needs someone to talk to? What value can I add to these people? The anxiety physically cannot coexist with that intention.
It's incompatible.
You have shifted from being the performer to being the host.
And this ties directly into the biology of emotional contagion, right?
Yes. Through the mechanism of mirror neurons in our prefrontal cortex, human beings are biologically wired to unconsciously mimic the physiological states of the people around them.
We are literally sponges for other people's vibes.
If you walk into a room vibrating with neurotic self-focus and anxiety, your micro-expressions and rigid body language will literally infect the people you speak to. They will feel unsettled and on edge around you without even knowing why.
And then they want to get away from you.
Exactly. But if you walk in grounded in your 4-4-6 breathing, projecting calm, curious, contribution-focused energy, their mirror neurons will lock onto that. They will physically relax in your presence. You become the emotional thermostat for the entire room.
You stop reacting to the temperature and you start setting it. Now, as you build this immense goodwill and this powerful network, there will inevitably come a time when you need to leverage it.
You have to make the ask eventually.
You will need to ask for funding, or advocate for a policy change, or close a deal. You need to wield influence. And we have to address the dark side of this because the line between ethical influence and manipulation can seem very, very thin.
It's a razor-thin line.
The research relies heavily on the universal principles of influence, things like reciprocity, commitment, social proof, authority, scarcity.
These are the fundamental levers of human psychology. They are neutral tools, like a scalpel. A scalpel can be used by a surgeon to save a life, or by a criminal to take one. The divergence between ethical influence and dark manipulation comes down to two things: intent and alignment with reality.
Let's examine the mechanics of that. Ethical influence is using these psychological levers to illuminate a path that genuinely benefits the other person. You are aligning what you want with what they actually need.
It's a win-win.
Manipulation is using these exact same levers through guilt, artificial fear, or distorted data to coerce compliance purely for your own extraction, leaving them worse off.
Let's look at the principle of reciprocity in action. A manipulator uses transactional debt. They buy you a cheap cup of coffee, or they do you a tiny unsolicited favor and then immediately weaponize it. Hey, I helped you out yesterday, now I need you to stay late and finish this entire report for me.
That feels so grimy.
They induce guilt. The ethical influencer, as we discussed with the value-first approach, builds a massive, genuine reservoir of goodwill over years without any covert contracts or immediate demands for withdrawal. When they finally ask for support, the network rushes to help them out of genuine gratitude, not manufactured guilt.
Scarcity is another lever that gets abused constantly. We see this all the time in marketing. The manipulator uses artificial, fabricated urgency. You have to sign this contract in the next 60 seconds, or the price triples.
We all hate that tactic.
They do this specifically to trigger an amygdala hijack, flooding your brain with panic so you cannot use your prefrontal cortex to analyze how terrible the deal actually is.
Exactly. They weaponize your biology against you. Ethical influence relies on real scarcity. If you are a consultant and you genuinely only have the bandwidth to take on 2 more clients this quarter, you communicate that transparently. I would love to work with you, but I only have 2 slots left before December. If you need time to think, take it, but I want to be honest about my
That's
constraints.
just the truth.
You're providing them with accurate reality so they can make an informed, autonomous decision. Ethical influence preserves the other person's autonomy. Manipulation destroys it.
It is the difference between forcing someone into a cage and basically opening a door they actually want to walk through. And mastering that ethical influence leads us to the final, most complex and highest stakes arena of emotional intelligence, leadership. We're moving from peer-to-peer networking to taking responsibility for the lives, careers, and performance of teams.
Leadership is the absolute crucible of EQ. The research makes a profound foundational statement. True leaders do not merely extract results from people. Anyone with a whip can extract short-term results.
But they'll all quit after 6 months.
Right. True leaders develop human potential. They don't manage performance. They architect an environment where people are intrinsically motivated to perform at their absolute peak. And this is entirely rooted in the psychology of transformational leadership.
The roadmap for transformational leadership is broken down into 4 specific psychological behaviors. Let's dissect these because they're incredibly powerful. The first behavior is idealized influence. This is essentially leading by authentic example, but it heavily involves demonstrating integrity and vulnerability.
Idealized influence is the destruction of the infallible boss myth. It is the leader who possesses the immense self-regulation required to stand up in front of their entire department and say, "The strategy we pursued last quarter failed. And it failed because I made a flawed assumption about the market data. Here's what I learned, and here is how we pivot."
Now, hold on. We talked earlier about vulnerability versus incompetence. If a leader is constantly admitting they don't know what they are doing, don't they lose the respect of their team? Where is the line between idealized influence and just looking like you are completely unfit for the job?
The line is drawn by competence and learning. You do not overshare your emotional instability. You don't get up and say, "I have no idea what I'm doing and I'm terrified we are all going to get fired."
Because then everyone starts panicking.
That destroys safety. You demonstrate vulnerability around the process of learning. By owning a specific miscalculation without ego, you signal to the entire organization, "In this company, the truth is more important than protecting my ego." You give them permission to be honest about their own mistakes. People do not follow perfection because perfection is an isolating lie. They follow self-aware authenticity.
That makes perfect sense. The second behavior is inspirational motivation. And we aren't talking about giving a cheesy rah-rah speech in the break room. It's about co-creating a compelling vision. It's the leader who asks the team, what would absolute excellence look like for us on this project? What legacy do we want to leave with this product?
You give them a stake in the outcome.
You weave their individual intrinsic motivations into the collective goal so they have deep emotional ownership of the outcome.
The third behavior is intellectual stimulation. This is the antidote to corporate stagnation. A transformational leader actively fights groupthink. They don't want compliance. They want friction.
They want you to push back.
They regularly look at a successful process and ask the team, "What fundamental assumptions are we making right now that might be completely wrong? If a competitor were to destroy us tomorrow, how would they do it?" They stimulate critical thought rather than demanding blind obedience.
And the fourth behavior is individualized consideration. This is the realization that a one-size-fits-all management style is the mark of a lazy leader. You have to use your empathy radar to understand that Sarah, your lead designer, thrives on autonomy and public recognition, whereas David, your data analyst, hates public praise but desperately wants private, deep-dive coaching sessions.
It requires high bandwidth empathy.
You tailor the environment to the individual psychology of the employee.
But here's the ultimate crux of leadership. None of those 4 behaviors, not a single one of them can exist without the foundational bedrock of psychological safety. If you want to know why one team solves complex problems in a week, while another team with the exact same IQ takes 6 months and fails, the differentiating variable is always psychological safety.
Let's define this clearly because it is probably the most misunderstood concept in modern corporate culture. Psychological safety is the shared, visceral belief across a team that you can take an interpersonal risk, you can propose a wild idea, or you could admit a catastrophic error without any fear of humiliation, retaliation, or punishment.
Exactly.
But I'm going to challenge you on this because I hear executives push back on this all the time. You have psychological safety and no punishment for mistakes, and their blood boils.
I know, they panic.
They think, great, so it's a country club. We just lower our standards, coddle the employees, and if someone loses $1 million account, we all sit around and sing Kumbaya. If there is no fear of punishment, Why would anyone strive for excellence?
This raises an important question, and it is the exact cognitive trap that keeps mediocre companies mediocre. The research absolutely obliterates this misconception. The highest psychological safety environments do not have low standards. They actually possess the most ruthlessly high standards of performance of any organizations on Earth.
Wait, really, give me an example.
Think of elite special forces teams or top-tier surgical units. They operate with maximum psychological safety and maximum standards.
How is that possible?
Yeah.
How do you have high standards without the fear of punishment?
Because their goal is systemic excellence, not individual perfection. Let's look at the mechanics of a low-safety environment, where the culture is driven by fear and punishment. What happens when an engineer accidentally deletes a critical database? They are terrified of being fired or humiliated.
So they hide it.
They hide the error. They spend the next 48 hours frantically trying to cover their tracks, shifting blame to other departments, managing their image. The problem festers in the dark until the entire system crashes and the company loses millions. Fear doesn't prevent mistakes. It drives mistakes underground where they become catastrophic.
So in a psychologically safe environment, the moment that engineer deletes the database, they immediately raise their hand and say, I just broke the system, here is what I did.
Precisely. Because they know they will not be attacked as a person. The problem is separated from their identity. The entire team instantly swarms the problem, fixes it in 20 minutes, and then conducts a blameless post-mortem to update the system protocols so that specific human error can never happen again.
So safety actually drives speed.
Safety means problems are addressed instantly, aggressively, and directly without human ego getting in the way. It optimizes for velocity and truth.
That is a total paradigm shift. You build that culture through what the research calls intellectual humility. When a junior employee brings a dissenting opinion, a toxic boss says, that's wrong, just do it my way. A transformational leader says, that goes against my instincts, but help me understand your thinking on that. Show me the data I'm missing.
They get curious.
Right. They respond to systemic failures, not with a witch hunt asking, who is responsible for this, but with genuine curiosity asking, what flaw in our process allowed this to happen and what can we learn?
But let's be realistic here. Even in a utopian, high psychological safety environment, human beings will inevitably clash. Egos will bruise. Budgets will be fought over. Conflict is an unavoidable reality of human physics. The true test of a leader is not avoiding conflict, but navigating it masterfully.
You need a framework.
And the protocol provides a highly specific, tactical roadmap for navigating high-stakes conflict, known as the PEACE Protocol, P-E-A-C-E.
Let's walk through this because this is the toolkit for surviving the hardest conversations of your career. The P stands for prepare. But to be clear, this does not mean preparing your arguments like a lawyer preparing to annihilate a witness on the stand.
No, not at all.
It means preparing your own emotional state. It means doing your 4-4-6 breathing before you walk into the room and explicitly defining your intention.
My goal is not to win an argument. My goal is to find a mutual solution.
If you walk in trying to win, you have already lost. The ease is engage with empathy. This is how you open the dialogue. You do not lead with an accusation. You use what relationship psychologists call the soft start. Right. You don't say, you totally screwed up the marketing budget. You say, I really value the work we are doing together on this launch, which is why I want to talk through some of the discrepancies I'm seeing in the budget allocation.
Yeah.
You anchor the conversation in the shared relationship before you introduce the friction. Then we hit the A, which is acknowledge emotions. And this is the step that 95% of managers skip because it feels messy and uncomfortable.
It is the most critical step. Human beings cannot process logical solutions while they are in emotional distress. If the other person is furious or defensive, their prefrontal cortex is offline. You have to acknowledge the emotional reality in the room to deactivate the threat response.
You just name it.
You have to say, I can see this process has been incredibly frustrating for you, and honestly, I've been feeling pretty overwhelmed by the timeline myself.
By naming the emotion, you literally dial down the amygdala activation in both of your brains. You have to solve the emotion before you can solve the logic. That is profound. Solve the emotion before the logic. Once the threat response is lowered, you move to the C. Collaborate on solutions. This is where you leverage those open-ended questions again. Instead of dictating the fix, you ask, what ideas do you have for restructuring this workflow? You force them to engage their own critical thinking, which gives them ownership over the solution.
And finally, the second E, establish next steps. A difficult conversation is entirely useless if it doesn't result in behavioral change. You must be ruthlessly specific. Okay, so we agree that you will send the revised drafts by Thursday at noon, and I will approve them by Friday morning. We will check back in on this specific issue during our one-on-one next Tuesday. You create a clear, undeniable framework for accountability.
It is an incredibly robust, bulletproof framework. And looking at all of this, it really brings our entire journey today full circle. We've covered a massive amount of psychological territory in this deep dive.
We really have.
We started by confronting the sheer, unvarnished financial reality, the $29,000 annual penalty for emotional blindness. We examined how relying solely on raw IQ leaves brilliant engineers and talented salespeople isolated and passed over because they cannot decode the emotional reality of the room.
We broke down the mechanics of the operating system, the 5 pillars of self-awareness, emotional regulation, intrinsic motivation, genuine affective and cognitive empathy, and adaptable social skills. And most importantly, we mapped out the neurological daily practice required to actually build the observer self. The hourly check-ins, the micropause of the S-stop-P protocol, and the vagus nerve stimulation of the 4-4-6 breathing technique.
We laid out the blueprint for the value-first approach to networking. We basically banned "how are you" from our vocabulary forever. We explored how to use disclosure reciprocity to build deep rapport, how to use metadata to track human details, and how to cure social anxiety by shifting into a contribution mindset. We defined the exact boundary between ethical influence and dark manipulation. And finally, we explored the psychological architecture of transformational leadership, why intellectual humility and psychological safety are the true engines of elite performance, and how to navigate the absolute hardest conversations using the peace protocol. So what does this all mean for you, listening right now?
That's the million-dollar question.
It means that everything you just heard is not a philosophy. It is a highly practical neuroplastic training program. The source material lays out a 90-day transformation, and you do not need a budget, a boss's permission, or a degree to start it. You can start it right this second. The very next thing you do can be pulling out your phone, setting an alarm for 2 hours from now, and committing to observing your emotional state when it rings. You have the blueprint to upgrade your operating system.
And as you embark on that daily practice, I want to leave you with one final, deeply counterintuitive concept derived from the research on resilience and anti-fragility. I want you to think about the absolute most difficult, abrasive, frustrating human being in your workplace right now. The person who constantly triggers your anxiety, who undermines you, who makes your blood boil just by walking into the room.
Oh, everyone has a name in their head right now.
Right. What if, starting tomorrow, you completely reframe their existence in your mind? Instead of viewing them as a toxic obstacle to your happiness, what if you viewed them as your personal, highly calibrated, high-resistance training simulator for emotional regulation?
A training simulator.
If you consciously decide to use them to use their hostility, to practice expanding your micropause, to use their passive aggression to test your 4-4-6 breathing, to use their chaos to practice your emotional granularity, they completely lose their power over you. They can no longer annoy you. Instead, they become the precise instrument that makes you emotionally unbreakable.
I absolutely love that. Instead of kicking the rusted door, you realize this difficult coworker isn't the lock keeping you out. They're the WD-40. Dealing with their friction is exactly what breaks down the rust in your own communication style. You have the key in your hand. You've always had the raw intelligence. Now you finally know how to build the emotional leverage to actually turn it.